Alberta and Saskatchewan are pursuing their full independence from Canada. Both of these provinces, both in the prairies, are looking to separate from the rest of Canada. Even though Alberta is farther ahead in the process of obtaining their independence, soon to have a referendum, this doesn't mean that the people of Saskatchewan don't have just as much desire to gain their sovereignty and separate from the rest of Canada as much as Alberta does. Now, many people in Alberta and Saskatchewan that are part of the independence movement will love to see the provinces become the 51st and 52nd states. But in order for that to happen, these provinces would have to gain their independence first. We would have to obtain independence separate from Canada before we can even have official talks with the United States to join the Union in some sort of deal, whether that's becoming a territory, a protectorate, or joining in full statehood. That'll also have to follow a process with Congress and so on and so forth. But the first step that needs to happen if Alberta and Saskatchewan want to become states in the United States is that we need to get our independence. We need to vote to become independent. And once we do have a successful referendum, once we get international recognition, particularly from a country, the most powerful country on earth, the United States, then we become de facto nations, whether Canada agrees or not. Think Taiwan. You think China recognizes Taiwan as an independent nation? No. To them, Taiwan is just a breakaway province. That's literally what they call it, just a rogue breakaway province of China. However, to the rest of the civilized world, everybody knows that Taiwan is an independent country, different and separate from China. So it's no different here for Saskatchewan and Alberta. Once we have a successful referendum, once we get international recognition after said successful referendum, then we become de facto independent nations. And that is when, if the people of Alberta and the people of Saskatchewan choose by their own will that they want to be a part of the United States, then that can happen.
Now, when we look at all of the provinces, we see that when the original Dominion of Canada was created and put together, it was Ontario and Quebec, right? Upper and Lower Canada, Plains of Abraham, big old scrap between the English and the French. Finally, they figured it out and they got themselves sorted out. So they had Upper and Lower Canada, Quebec and Ontario. But then they decided to bring in two more provinces as bookends, which would be Manitoba and New Brunswick. Now, Manitoba did negotiate their way somewhat. Ottawa was still a little bit cranky about the whole Louis Riel thing, you know, property rights, autonomy, all the things they don't like over there. But they still let them negotiate their way in a bit. New Brunswick also negotiated their way into Confederation. British Columbia came on board, also negotiated their way into Confederation. Remember, that was to keep the U.S. out. Right? Because they were getting ready to join forces with Alaska. They had already bought Alaska. They wanted to have their own way, like right up there along the coast. And so the Canadian government at the time said, oh, absolutely not. And they took over what we know today as British Columbia and brought that into Confederation. The other two maritime provinces that I've already clicked on, so Prince Edward Island and Nova Scotia, negotiated their way in. Newfoundland was the last one to negotiate their way in. In the 1950s, they held out for a long, long time. We did not. We were brought in. There was not even a legislature building here. There was nobody at the table to say, this is what we want, this is what we don't want. It was, this is what you're all going to get. That's the foundation that our two provinces have been built on.
Economically, these two provinces are incredibly valuable to Canada, but they haven't been treated as such. They've actually been used as cash cows for decades and decades. And historically, these were two provinces that they didn't negotiate their way into Canada. Instead, they were assimilated as colonies, basically. So the people of Alberta, Albertans, and Saskatchewans have now realized that there's simply no way to negotiate a better deal with Canada. They've been trying for decades and decades, and it just hasn't happened.
This, of course, is not simply an Alberta issue. I don't know how many have seen these billboards or how prominent they are in Saskatchewan, but this is playing out in Saskatchewan politics too, although I think at the moment more forcefully in Alberta. That's my sense, at least. You can tell me if I'm wrong about that, than here. So there's a degree of political organization, I think, that sets these movements apart in the prairies as in Quebec. But it's also the case that that dynamic may be shifting in the West. Let me allow you just to read the words of Preston Manning, the eminence grise, I think, of the conservative movement. I'll give you a moment to read a portion of his op-ed in the Globe from this spring. And so some people have begun to say, again, in the Alberta separatist movement, where's our conference? This has come to pass. It's time to move the wheels on Alberta's exit from Canada. And when a figure with the political legitimacy of Preston Manning, he's a former leader of the official opposition in the House of Commons. He has immense political influence in the provincial government and at the national, and we've seen recently international level. When Preston Manning is saying it's time for Alberta to separate, which I think is the implication of this op-ed, then it's hard not to think that this is a political movement, at least that you have to take seriously and should be taken seriously. So the movement is real. It has political influence, especially within the Conservative Party of Alberta.
The Trump administration has been looking north at what's happening in Canada, noticing that the federal Liberal government under Justin Trudeau for a decade and now under globalist central banker Mark Carney is only getting closer and closer to China and cozying up to the communist regime out in Beijing. The Trump administration has reportedly expressed support for Alberta to obtain their independence, telling the Alberta Prosperity Project that upon a successful referendum, they would be willing to give international recognition to the new nation of Alberta. And in turn, one can assume that the same level of support would be given to an independent Saskatchewan. As I said before, these are two provinces that have been used mostly as cash cows as opposed to equal partners in Canada. Canada is a country that is mostly dominated by Ontario and Quebec, Quebec being the biggest culprit of taking advantage of the current system. We have something called equalization payments here, which Alberta is the biggest contributor to it per capita, and you have the biggest consumer of this communist scheme being Quebec, just consuming resources while contributing very little. Very recently, Ontario has also become a consumer of this scheme, while Alberta continues to be taken advantage of, while having very little political influence in the country known as Canada. It'll come as no surprise to those of you watching that I support Alberta independence. I'm all for Alberta separating and creating its own nation.
Hey, if you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to be notified every time a new video is published, hit the subscribe button and activate the notifications bell. It's completely free and it helps our channel grow. A heartfelt thank you to all our channel members. I really appreciate your support. See you all in the next one. Peace.